Welcome to Bonnie's Beat. I'm your host, Bonnie Squires. We're coming to you from the beautiful studios of Radnor Studio 21 in downtown Wayne. And we like to showcase people who are doing important things in the community, either in academia, charities, business-wide, special events. And we got somebody who's involved in all of those, as a matter of fact, today. Our guest today is the prominent attorney, Stephen Scheller. Hi, Steve.
Hi, how are you, Bonnie?
Now, you used to live on the main line.
Yeah, we lived in Bryn Mawr, right near here.
And you deserted us.
I deserted you. My two daughters moved out on me. Over here, one is a lawyer, and she's due to have a baby November 14th.
Oh, soon.
And another daughter, Danielle, married a young man who's a fifth-year resident in plastic surgery up at Harvard in Boston. And then, of course, I have two older daughters. Jamie is a lawyer. She still lives here.
And
Mimi lives here.
And are both of them with your law firm?
Yeah, both. My daughter Jamie and my daughter Mimi. Mimi is a full professor at Drexel, and Jamie is a lawyer. And so I got four daughters. In fact, my wife was just up in Boston helping out with the baby, and she's completely worn out. She came back yesterday.
His wife, Sandy, is very active in a lot of charities as well, and has founded a number of charities. But today we're going to talk to Steve Scheller about election improprieties. You may remember something about hanging chads in the election of 2000 and what happened in Florida. This is the man that was responsible for the recount in Florida. And he's going to talk about the background. He loves his mother-in-law because his mother-in-law is the one who called and sounded the alarm. So you take it from there, Steve.
Well, what happened, it's now, right after the day of the election in Palm Beach County, and my mother-in-law, who has passed away now 2 years, lived in Boca Raton. And she calls me up at about 4 p.m. that day, and she was apoplectic, really upset. I said, well, calm down, Mom. So she starts to tell me about what later became called the butterfly ballot, and how it was a complete mess at the polling place that she voted in, because the punch ballots, nobody had seen them before. In fact, the local Boca Palm Beach County head of voting, whatever it was, she was supposed to have published the ballot beforehand. And the reason you're supposed to do that is if anybody's going to object to the names, how they're spelled, how they're listed, they have an opportunity to do so. Like a month or so before. They published a different ballot, not the one. Right.
Oh.
They didn't publish.
Bait and switch. I love it.
They didn't publish. Teresa Lepore was her name. I don't think she did it intentionally. What she had done is she had created this, what we now know as the butterfly ballot, to help the elderly people see it better. So it was.
She thought.
She thought it would help.
She thought.
Well, instead she did it in a way that you had a mix-up, because your first name on the left side was Gore. The second side, on the other side of the butterfly, was Buchanan. And then on the left side, you had Bush. So when the people came in, they would naturally think number 1 and 2 would have, because number 2 is opposite the name of Gore as well. So they thought they were voting first for Gore, and then they thought by the next one on the other side was Buchanan. They thought that was the vice president, or some reason, or who they were voting for. They thought it was natural to follow in the line that way, and they hit the Buchanan one. These machines, these were very old, some of them, and not only that, the paper that was used, you slide it into some kind of thingamajig, and then you have to use a pen, a punch thing to push it out. It didn't push out easily. Some parts of South Florida was more thicker paper, and where these ballots were created was in Addison, Texas, Bush's home territory. Whether that was by a company called ES&S, which was owned by a Republican. So,
Well, we'll hold that against him. I mean, he's got to have a
but
contract.
Teresa Lepore actually thought she was being helpful. That I believe. She didn't realize it would be so messed up.
Well,
And
when you look at the schematic of this butterfly ballot, there are 3 names on the left side
Right.
and only 2 names on the right,
Right side, right.
And the holes didn't line up.
And they didn't line up.
They didn't line up at all. So people thought they were punching, what they wanted, Gore Lieberman, and they were getting
Right.
Gore Buchanan.
They were getting Gore Buchanan. And anyway, so she calls me, and I didn't know
Your
what the heck.
mother-in-law,
My
yeah.
mother-in-law, and I didn't know what was going on. So she starts explaining it, and I realize at that point there's something pretty wrong in Palm Beach County. Ed Rendell was head of the DNC, Democratic National Committee at the time, and I'm friendly with Ed. We know each other for many, many years. So I call Ed up, and his first response, "Oh, it's your mother-in-law. She doesn't know what she's talking about." And I guess it was about 4 a.m. in the morning that night. I'm sleeping. I get a call from Ed. You may be onto something. So we talk about it. And I said, yeah. He said, yeah, I'm hearing all kinds of reports of craziness in Florida. So he says, can you get down there right away? And I think he said, get your parachute and go down there. And he says, for now, on your own dime. I never, it was pro bono.
Yeah.
And obviously I was a Gore supporter. So I get down there a day or so later, and I get a couple of my friends who are lawyers. One is Gary Farmer, who's now in the state senate there. Another is Dave Crathan, who became a judge, and he was in Broward County. Gary,
Did Mark Aronchik go down with you?
and well, Ed, what happened is I first did the exploratory. I get down there, and we figured out. So my friends are asking me, well, what do you think we should do? And I said, well, what I normally do is, from what I understand, this is a mess. The citizens didn't get to vote for the right person. Nobody knew what the heck was going on. It was total bedlam. I said, let's seek an immediate injunction barring Harris, who was the state secretary, who was
Catherine
also,
Harris.
and she was also Bush's chairperson, I think, for Florida. And she was about to certify the Palm Beach County results. And I said, we got to stop that. So I get my friends, we draft up papers, and we file for an injunction, a temporary restraining order. And we file it, we run down to the courthouse, and lo and behold, it's granted. We got a temporary restraining order. Well, under the Florida rules, they have to hold a hearing within 7 to 10 days on that. So a hearing is now scheduled 7 or 8 days later on our injunction to confirm we were entitled to it.
Because all of these senior citizen Jewish Democrats that thought they were voting for Gore, it turns out that they were voting for Buchanan because
He got
of the
3,000 votes.
which was insane.
And he
insane.
himself was saying this is
Yes,
insane.
yes, he
he
said,
said, where are the people? Everybody knew it was a mix-up, and it might have been fraudulent. Anyway, so I get a hold of Ed, and I said, look, we're filing for this injunction. Believe it or not, we got it. And the people we represented, though, was not Gore. We filed it on behalf of the residents, voters of Palm Beach County, on the theory that they are the ones who were disenfranchised by this mess. Anyway, so, and I said, can you get me some help? And he sends Mark Aronchik, and we got a couple of other people. They came down to help us. In the meantime, they schedule trying to get a judge. I hold the record in Palm Beach County for judge recusals. 5 in 1 week. None of the judges wanted this. They didn't want it. Anyway, so what ends up happening, we finally get a judge who's going to hear George Labarga, a Cuban-American. He used to be the head of the Cuban-American Republican Club before he got elected, chosen as a judge there. And before I got to him, I had been in the court trying to get assigned for a judge. And the chief judge of Palm Beach County looks at me and he says, "You're a carpetbagger." Anyway.
But my mother-in-law lives here.
Well, it gets even stranger. So we finally get to the courtroom. Before we could get to the courtroom, there were helicopters, and Jesse Jackson's hundreds were coming one way to the courthouse. They were having a march. The rednecks were coming the other way, and then on top of that, he had all these National Guard people because everybody was upset. They were dressed in these outfits. I thought we were going to get killed. Anyway, we couldn't get into the courthouse. The doors were locked. We were a little early. Finally, I see a law clerk for one of the judges that I knew there, and he lets us in the side door. Finally, we get in. So we get into the thing, and we get the hearing. In the meantime, hundreds of lawyers were floating in from all over the place. Who's representing Bush? The law firm of Greenberg Traurig. The lawyer was a guy named Larry Richard. Greenberg Traurig, the founding partner, is my first cousin, Larry Hoffman.
Keep it in the family.
Now, he's my first cousin by marriage. His wife is my blood first cousin. And I said, "What are you doing here?" So the battle starts, and lo and behold, the judge was very reasonable. What I wanted them to do, we had statisticians take a close look at the ballots and what happened. And they did a statistical analysis based on the Buchanan vote, and they reached the conclusion that very clearly that Gore had won Palm Beach County. And this was a citizen's lawsuit now. And that by about 2,000 to 3,000 votes, just statistically. So I had the choice was a revote, which, by the way, if it was just Palm Beach County, would have been feasible to do a revote. 2 would be use statistics, and 3 would be do the recount. Well, under Florida law, if the victor won by less than 1%, you're automatically entitled to a recount. So Judge Labarga ended up not going with the statistical analysis, not going with the revote, but ordering the recount and how it was to be done. And he did it very nicely. That's when you saw the people looking at the chads and all that.
Chads, yes.
Right. And as of that time, we still didn't know that the ballots had been made in Anderson, Texas. We were not aware of all the strange things going on. I'll describe that in a little bit. And the recount started. That's when Mark Ronchek arrives. And this is going on now for a few days. In the middle of it all, I get called to come down. I went to Penn undergrad and Penn Law. And now that I'm on CNN and all, I'm famous. Can you come back to Penn Law? It's our 150th anniversary just for this one day. They're having a big thingamajig there. So I grab a plane that evening, go there, get to Penn Law School, and and who was the speaker for the 150th anniversary of Penn Law? Sandra Day O'Connor.
Ooh, isn't that nice?
And she goes on and on about women in the law and how great things are and so on, and a fire alarm rings. She goes charging out in front of everybody. She's a tall woman with white hair, and it was just strange. And then, of course, I go back to Palm Beach, to Boca, living with my mother-in-law. You heard about post-traumatic stress disorder? 8 weeks with my mother-in-law. I had it. I'm telling you, I managed to deal with that. And in the meantime, Gore finally decides he's going to get in. So they contact me and they say, "Well, we want to go forward with the case. Would you back off and let us take over? Withdraw your complaint." And that's how the case changed to Gore versus Bush. And what they did is they wanted to move the case to Tallahassee, and it became a constitutional issue of equal protection. My case was much simpler. It was plain out fraud, and if not fraud, clear misrepresentation and misunderstanding, and there's no doubt that they had to do a recount of those ballots. None. And that would have kept us away from our friends on the Supreme Court, the guys who think Hitler is still around if you're a Democrat. Anyway, so we go and we allow them to take over, and they bring in a lawyer named David Boies, and they move the case to Tallahassee. And I tried to explain to them, I said, you're making a mistake. I think you should leave the allegations about under the Consumer Protection Law and the voting law of Florida, and not just make it an equal protection argument. The problem with the equal protection argument is you need to, there's a difference of opinion amongst lawyers and judges, whether you have to show intentional effort to limit the ability of the people to vote. In other words, we'd have to show possibly on one theory that Teresa Lepore intentionally did that.
Did it on purpose.
Yeah. Others believe, well, that's not necessarily required, but we were walking into the middle of that, and it was going to be decided under Florida law. For reasons that, to this day, make no sense, the U.S., the Florida courts, and it was up in the Florida, we were going to get the recount was going forward, and there was no doubt, I'm telling you, no doubt, not even 1/100th of 1%, that Gore didn't win Florida. Not a chance. There's a claim that Miami Herald people recounted it, and that Bush would have won by a couple of votes. They don't know what the hell they're talking about. If they talked to me, I would have showed them the ballots. I would have demonstrated everything. We also had several other problems in Florida, like an extra dot in one of the other counties, which knocked out all the votes that had the dot that were basically for Gore. Gore won Florida by around 50,000 votes, not just 2,000. And these people at the Miami Herald, they don't know what they're talking about. I don't care what they say. I sound like Trump now. I'm right. Anyway, but I am right. Anyway, so what ends up happening, we back off, and the case goes forward on the equal protection argument and not using, the basic, simplest theory. We're entitled to our vote being counted. We are citizens of Palm Beach County. We didn't get it, and Judge Labarga actually had it right as to how to do it. It would have been done. And I consider that my worst law, and I backed off. Now, I should not have backed off. I should have argued with a lawyer.
Yeah, but when the Vice
President calls you,
calls you and says, could you please, cease and desist, we brought in somebody else.
Right.
What are you supposed to say?
And Boies is a name brand lawyer from New York, and what was surprising is he didn't even meet with us before they go. Yeah, he didn't know what our theories were, why we were doing what we're doing. They move away from Labarga to some judge in Tallahassee, and being in Tallahassee is more like moving from Philadelphia to Harrisburg. You don't want to, you're not going to find a lot of Democrats in Tallahassee. Okay. It's not and plus we had the crowds demonstrating and all those pressures were going on. And also we found similar problems in Broward and Dade County. And all of Florida does not use that kind of machine. So it goes up, and somehow or other the Supreme Court in a 5-4 ruling decides that you can't recount the ballots. They were in the midst of the recount because they were still doing the hand recount.
Yeah, the guys, they were holding them up to the light to see where the hole was, where the hanging
which is how Judge Labarga wanted it done. You wanted to find out what, and that was stopped by the Supreme Court. Now, you have to remember that who was on the Supreme Court at that time. Justice Scalia was one, and although we in Philadelphia and across the country honor him and give him awards. He's a bad guy, in my opinion. That's my opinion, for what it's worth. His son was a lawyer with the counsel who represented Bush. Talk about conflicts of interest.
Wow.
He had already been just in a month or 2 months before at Bush's ranch. Sandra Day O'Connor had already said she would, I forget the exact words, but it would be a disaster for the country if Gore became president. She had already said that. Then you had Thomas, whose wife was worked for the Republican Party and was one of their people, and he's on the court. So you got 3 of the votes that never should have been allowed to vote. In fact, the Supreme Court is one of the only courts in the country that can get away with that kind of conflict of interest. Since that time, these conflicts should never have been permitted. So we faced that. And after the election was over, Gary and I and some other lawyers decided to look at what was going on with these ballots. So we wanted to get the unvoted ballots, because we had already gotten information that it appeared that the ballot paper was, the bad ballot paper was given to the communities that were mainly going to vote Democratic, and the better paper was...
There's a pattern to this.
Right, there was a pattern. And then we also learned that the ballots were made by a crackpot way, in my opinion, in Addison, Texas, by a company that was known to be supporting Republicans generally. So we wanted to get those ballots.
They couldn't find somebody in Florida that could produce the ballots?
Nope. Anyway, so they decide they won't give them to us. We then began litigation that went on for quite a while to get the ballots. We finally have them. And we did send off a couple of the ballots for electron microscopy to Cambridge University. And they said there was the ballots were the way it was cut. There was something wrong, and we needed to go further. However, we never were able to finish the litigation and get the ballots in a way that we had time to have them analyzed or anything. And the lawyers just ES&S took out all their machines. They no longer use them in Florida.
Oh, that's good.
Right, but the company got a big contract. Yeah, of some sort, I don't know. So they don't use these machines anymore in Florida. And if you look back historically, and it's in my book, Farmageddon, A Nation Betrayed, which ties in with the work I do generally, you'll learn that the previous elections with Dole and Reno used those, and there was some clear evidence that there was some mistakes that were being made with these ballots, that there's something going on there. And if you look at my first chapter of my book, you'll see it. And why I start a book which is called Farmageddon, A Nation Betrayed, about the pharma industry, has to do with the...
That's, pharma stands for pharmaceuticals.
Yeah, P-H-A-R-M-A, Farmageddon. And as we now know, I believe most people would agree there's something radically wrong with the pharma industry. It may explain partly what's going on with the Obamacare, why it's so expensive, that we don't have ability to control the prices of drugs or bargain with them.
If you go to Amazon.com, you can read the first chapter of Farmageddon by
It's not just Farmageddon. You need Farmageddon, A Nation Betrayed.
Stephen Scheller, and you can read that first chapter that talks about what happened in Florida. But let's tie it to present day, where Trump says the whole election is rigged.
Well, if anything, the election now in Florida is far safer as a result of our litigation and across the country, because as a result of that, not to say that there can't be instances of fraud or something on an occasion, but now people are much more careful.
Not wholesale fraud.
not wholesale fraud. It's going to be, for them to get away with that today would be very difficult. And that isn't to say that with the new technology and the Russians,
Yes. When 17 different intelligence agencies of the U.S. government have all concluded that the hacking of Hillary Clinton's emails has been done by Russia, and there's denial across the board on the other side of the aisle, it's very upsetting.
well, what's going on, and this tied today's election here in Pennsylvania and Florida, and the emails, and they have found another way to steal an election. And that's what's going on. And I think, like Sandra Day O'Connor, I think it would be a true disaster, though, for this country to have Trump elected president. The guy he's a sexual predator. I don't care what anybody says. He's nuttier than a fruitcake, and he is. And just to call him a narcissist is totally inadequate. The guy's got something really seriously wrong with his brain. And we don't know what his medical records truly show.
Well, the thing that's upsetting is that his viewpoint is, will this make money for Donald Trump and his businesses? Will this increase the prestige of my brand? And that's the only thing that he looks at, doesn't consider anything else or anybody else. Right. I mean, he even made his wife the butt of his one joke at the Al Smith dinner in New York City, which must have been very painful for her, when he reiterated that when Michelle Obama gave a speech, everybody loved it, and when my wife, Melania, gave the exact same speech word for word, they were all over her. Well, everybody laughed in the room, and she must have been dying inside, Melania. That was a terrible thing to do.
Yeah.
Not a nice
well,
man.
it's bad. The other question is, the emails with Hillary. I have a so what. So Bill got some job as a result of, but money went to the Clinton Foundation, which does a lot of good stuff.
A lot of good stuff.
And not only
Around the
that,
world.
if I was a defense criminal lawyer and my client was prosecuted based on a good deal of evidence that was stolen, they can't use the evidence. They cannot use the evidence even if they found something. The other issue is, what is classified? Who's doing the classification? I saw Trump, a couple of the emails had a C on it. Well, that didn't pertain to classified. It pertained to confidential, which is entirely different. And nobody seems to have picked up adequately. I know it's been mentioned, but the C is for confidential, not classified.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Very interesting.
And what is classified? I mean...
And how can you go back after the fact and then classify something when it wasn't classified at the time?
At the time, right. Well, the other problem is how, you got to wonder, how do you decide what to do, as you point out, today, and deal with this kind of problem in the middle of a presidential election.
Very divisive presidential
why
election.
wouldn't it wait until after the election?
Yeah.
We're waiting for after the election, and I hope the Democrats demand that Mr. Trump be indicted because he's a sexual predator and he engaged in sexual harassment and misconduct. He needs to be charged. There's now 12 women. The latest one came out last night, I believe.
Oh.
A Finnish Miss Finland or something.
When he says, I don't know any of these women, and one of them had been on his Celebrity Apprentice show, and the other one had been in one of his beauty contests, of course he knew them. How could he? His nose should be 20 feet
criminal
long.
conduct. We need to find out what states these people were in when he did what he did. I think New York.
All right. Our guest today has been attorney Steve Scheller. You got to read his book, Farmageddon, and keep watching for him in headlines. We'll see you next week.